Hey, folks, welcome to the pre-show of the program, which has not started yet. Welcome to the chat room. If you're over there in the chat room, I see Field Guy, Matthew Sainsbury, So Far, and me, and Subspace Radio. So welcome to everybody that's gathering out there. Come on over into the chat room. Randall Flagg, good to see you, brother. It's going to be a fun show tonight. And we've got a couple of other things to get into. We're going to talk about a few things tonight. So much stuff to talk about. I need a 3-hour show tonight, but we don't have one. So we'll do what we can. I've got a couple of things I want to hit before we get to the reading horror books. And we've kind of covered the reading horror books thing before in the past from a different angle. But this should be fun. I want to talk about, I want to lead us off tonight talking about the Trump trial. It's only going to take a few minutes at the top of the hour. I just think it's important for us to get a perspective on this if you don't already have one. Talking about Dershowitz, Alan Dershowitz. He says that the New York prosecutors are violating voters' rights with Trump trial. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. Aroo! Elderberry, good to see you. And what else we got? We're going to talk about a CEO that warns left-wing college students that they're breathing the vapors of a dangerous new fake and self-destructing religion. And you can imagine what that one's about. Yeah, they sure are. And then we're going to hit 14 in the spirit of talking about books and reading the last couple of nights. 14 creepy things that were found in libraries. That'll lighten it up before we get into reading horror is good for you and even better for your kids. I got to sneeze here pretty quick. We got about 40 seconds. 40 seconds not to sneeze. 40 seconds until we start over on Odyssey Radio. If you want to hear the show in just its audio format, go on over there. And in just a few seconds, we're going to go dark. And you know what that means. Sit tight, because we'll be coming right back. Stand by.
Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent talk.
Well, hey, folks, welcome to the program. I'm your host, Scotty Roberts. This is my show, the Intrepid radio program, right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. You can go over to odysyradio.com to hear this show in its audio radio format. And you can catch a bunch of archives over there as well. And tune in and find out all the other good shows that are going on over at Odyssey Radio. Now, if you're at Odyssey or you're anywhere else, if you're picking up this show on anywhere other than Odyssey Radio or my YouTube channel, and you want to join the chat room, you might have places like on Facebook where you can leave comments. Things like that is not the chat room. If you want the best chat room for this show, come on over to my YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Scotty Roberts. And you can come on over and you can find the chat room already in progress. Welcome to everybody who's gathering over there. What's a dude? What are you guys talking about? I met a CEO today, said Field Guy. Great field. Maybe he's good. Maybe he's good luck. I don't know what you're talking about there, Elderberry, but unless you're responding to something I said or she. I hope even so, even though I had met him in the past. Field guy. You guys are talking about stuff. You're referencing things. So let's just move on. I want to hit a couple of things tonight before we get into our book stuff. And the book stuff is good, but let's move because I got a lot of other stuff I want to talk about, and it's all happening tonight. So I want to get there, and I want to talk about a couple of things. First thing I want to talk about is something we're all very well aware of, unless we're staying kind of tuned out of what's going on deliberately, and that's the Trump trial that's going on right now, Donald Trump trial. And that's happening up in New York right now. Now, you know Alan Dershowitz. Alan Dershowitz is an attorney. He's quite well known. He's also a pundit now in his upper years. And he says that the New York prosecutors are violating voters' rights with the Trump trial. You know, you may have already made up your mind that they either are or they aren't. There are people, most of the people I run into regarding Trump and the trials going on, all they want to see is him going to prison. That ain't going to happen on this trial, I got to tell you. Even if it's all stacked against him and there's some conspiracy behind it, he's not going to prison. Not for this, especially not for this. And this of the 4 different trials going on right now, this is the one that they think could send him to jail. And they're not interested in justice, they being the left. Nobody's interested in justice on that side. They're interested in seeing Donald Trump taken out and having his corporation stripped from him, his money stripped from him. There is so much political hatred there. Now, Dershowitz said the law is being abused for partisan political purposes and to constitute election interference. That's what Dershowitz has to say. So retired Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz accused the office of the New York District Attorney Alvin Bragg. We talked about Bragg's indicting of Trump almost a year ago. But Alvin Bragg, he has accused him of violating voters' rights by prosecuting former President Donald Trump, with the legal scholar arguing that the case amounts to a criminal conspiracy to influence elections. Get that? Mr. Dershowitz made remarks in an interview on Newsmax on the 22nd of the month, which marked the first day of President Trump's criminal trial in Manhattan. That was Monday of this week, by the way. The former president's been charged with 34 counts of falsifying business records to hide non-disclosure payments, which, by the way, the 34 counts are all for the same thing. It's just 34 different entries as payments were made. So it's 34 counts of falsifying business records to hide non-disclosure payments, which is popularly termed hush money, in a deal made to prevent the other party seeking publication of damaging but unproven claims, which prosecutors allege amounted to a criminal conspiracy to influence the 2016 presidential election. Now, in their opening arguments, Assistant District Attorney Matthew Colangelo, it looks like C-O-L Colangelo, there it is, portrayed the payments that Trump made as part of a planned, coordinated, long-running conspiracy to influence the 2016 election to help Donald Trump get elected through illegal expenditures to silence people who had something bad to say about his behavior. That was his opening statements in this trial this week. And it was election fraud, pure and simple, Mr. Colangelo alleged, claiming that the case is about a criminal conspiracy and a cover-up. That's the prosecution's big stab into the case. Now, in his interview on Newsmax, Mr. Dershowitz challenged the New York prosecutor's claims when he asked for his take on their allegations that President Trump orchestrated a criminal conspiracy to influence the 2016 election. He insisted that the case amounts to an abuse of law for partisan political purposes and to constitute election interference. Now, mind you, Dershowitz is not a Republican. He's not a conservative. Well, he's probably more conservative than liberal. He's been a lifelong liberal. He voted for Biden. He is not a Trump voter. He is not a MAGA guy. And he's saying this. It's interesting. All the news outlets that are traditionally leftist are saying a lot of the same things. It's the state that's violating the right of all of us as voters to vote for a candidate based on the pros and cons of his candidacy, not on some made-up fake criminal charges, he said. So the former Harvard law professor then criticized the Manhattan District Attorney, Alvin Bragg, for elevating the charges against President Trump from misdemeanors to felonies on what he argued was an invalid legal premise because Mr. Bragg invoked federal statutes over which New York has no jurisdiction. It wasn't even in his bailiwick. It wasn't even in his jurisdiction, Alvin Bragg, to bring these charges against Trump. As a matter of fact, the FEC had examined all of this before the 2016 election and found that there was nothing to bring to trial on the federal level where this case belongs. They vacated it. They said there's nothing here. Now, Dershowitz then said, like he has in the past, that in his 60 years of practicing and teaching criminal law, he had never seen a case premised on such flimsy legal ground as the one that launched this last Monday. President Trump told reporters when entering the courthouse on Monday that he views the case as an act of very unfair election interference, as he could be out campaigning, but instead he has to waste his time sitting in court for 6 weeks, is what the judges told him. And they put a gag order on him, which is insane. Usually gag orders are for the protection of defendants. The protection of defendants. That's why there's gag orders. This gag order, the judge gag ordered Trump, the defendant. But nobody else has a gag order on him. Michael Cohen, a witness, doesn't for the prosecution. Prosecution doesn't. Why does Trump have a gag order? And so his attorney, Todd Blanche, expressed a similar sentiment, saying that in an opening statement that his client is innocent, that Mr. Bragg should never have brought the case. The New York prosecution has taken on added importance because it may be the only one of the 4 cases against President Trump to go to trial before the November 5th presidential election. That's why they pushed this thing. They want so bad to get a conviction so they can announce to the public Donald Trump is now a convicted criminal. Now, Mr. Bragg's office didn't respond to a request for comment on Mr. Dershowitz's allegations. And go figure. Harvey Kushner, another legal expert and chair of the Criminal Justice Department at Long Island University in Brookville, New York, told the Epoch Times in an earlier interview that he sees the case as an effort on the part of weaponized district attorney with serious political ambitions of his own to undermine President Trump's campaign. So what's the case about? Mr. Bragg indicted President Trump on 34 counts of allegedly falsifying business records in order to conceal $130,000 in payments to adult film actress Stormy Daniels in exchange for keeping quiet about her allegations of an affair. Now, keep in mind, Stormy Daniels issued a statement, I think last year, that said she never had an affair with Donald Trump and that he didn't pay her any money to silence her. So that's very interesting. She gave her own statement on that. Now, under New York state law, falsifying business records is a misdemeanor. This is what they're saying Trump did, falsified his records. However, if the records fraud was used to cover up or commit another crime, the charge could be elevated to a felony through a number of legal experts, including Mr. Dershowitz, have challenged the way it's been done in this case. In order to turn the state statute into a felony, you have to borrow a federal statute, Dershowitz told in an interview. And he said that his combining of laws seems to raise real serious legal questions. He's talking about Alvin Bragg. In Bragg's case, what they're trying to do is add 1 and 1 and come up with 11, Dershowitz said. No rational person would look at these two statutes and say that Trump violated them. Whether you like them or not, there is a rule of law. So former Trump attorney Michael Cohen, who is currently doing prison time for lying to Congress and for perjury, and now hates Donald Trump. He was Trump's attorney at the time. He said he made $130,000 in a number of separate payments to Ms. Daniels via a shell company that was then reimbursed by President Trump's company, the Trump Organization, and recorded as legal expenses. In court on Monday, prosecutors alleged that Mr. Cohen, along with President Trump and his friend David Pecker, the CEO of a media company, jointly came up with the criminal scheme to influence the 2016 election to conceal negative information about then-candidate Trump to help him get elected. President Trump has denied the allegations, while claiming that the payments to Mr. Cohen were for a legal retainer. So you see, Trump, the way this works, big mogul like Trump has lawyers that do his business for him. It was Cohen who has testified in the past that he chose to make these payments to Daniels. He was not ordered to do so by Trump. Now he's changing his testimony because he now hates Trump, because he's gone to prison for it, for lying to Congress. Now, prosecutors have alleged that this was all a lie. Alina Habba, an attorney that represents President Trump in a separate civil case in New York, told reporters on Monday that, like Dershowitz, she sees the case as boiling down to election meddling. The fact that we have two courts, not one, criminal and civil, being used against one man because they cannot beat him in the polls is a disgrace to the American judicial system, she said, while describing the case as the epitome of a witch hunt. So meanwhile, a new Rasmussen poll shows that a majority of Americans, 51%, believe it's unlikely that President Trump will get a fair trial in New York, including 31% who say a fair trial is not at all likely for Trump. So there you go. That's what is going on with that case. Yeah, Pecker, Randallwood. Peckerwood was what came to mind. Randall Flagg. I said the same thing when I saw that. So if you're not up to snuff on what's going on with this trial in New York right now with Trump, that's it. Alvin Bragg took a misdemeanor, which, by the way, the statute of limitations had already run out on that misdemeanor. But what did Bragg do? He got the court to legally extend the statute of limitations so he could bring Trump to court on this. And he brought him to court stating that Trump was trying to sway an election with it when it wasn't even Trump that made the payments. So there you go. And he's got to prove this case. And Trump says, I didn't do that. You're all nuts. And Stormy Daniels said it didn't happen. Michael Cohen said it didn't happen either. That was all on him, but then changed his story later after he got put in prison for lying. So on other things. So you tell me and get your leftist friends to tell you that Trump deserves to go to jail. This is all orchestrated. All these trials. Never has one man been put through this much over the things they're bringing him to court for, and been a former president of the United States running for office again. This is all unique. So there you go. There's a little update on that. So let's move on. I got some other things here I want to talk about. Have nothing to do with that. And because I think there's some interesting stuff here. All the protests that are going on right now about Gaza. You hardly hear the word Gaza anymore, don't you? About Palestine and Palestinians, protests against Israel, needing a ceasefire. That's where this all started. Do you remember that? Now it's turned into everything from the river to the sea. And I'm sure you've heard the explanations, but the river they're speaking of is the Jordan River, which runs north to south from the Sea of Galilee in the north down straight south to the Dead Sea. And the river to the sea is the Mediterranean, which is to the west. What's in the middle of the river and the sea? Israel. So they're claiming that they need from the river to the sea. And it's turned into anti-Semitism going on at our colleges and universities. So now there's a CEO who is warning left-wing college students that they're breathing the vapors of a very dangerous, new, fake, and self-destructive religion. Now it's Alex Karp, K-A-R-P, Chief Executive Officer of data technology company Planeteer, drew applause during a panel discussion when he issued a warning to college students, presumably over their growing inclination to support terror groups who want to wipe Israel off the map. Yeah, and the U.S. has no leader. You're absolutely right, Randall Flagg. He says, Karp said this, I am not a legislator, but I am running one of the coolest companies in the world. And I'm telling young people, you're breathing the vapors of a dangerous new fake and self-destructive religion when you're sitting at your elite school pretending because you watched TikTok twice and got an A+ on some crazy paper because your professor couldn't get a job anywhere else that you actually understand the world. And you're not welcome at my company. Karp made his comments at the most recent Reagan National Defense Forum. And while the event took place in December, these specific words of his are just now getting traction on social media. Elsewhere during the panel, Karp blasted companies that stayed silent in the wake of Hamas's deadly October 7th terror attacks against Israel. He said, as far as I can tell, there are only 3 companies that have been publicly pro-Israel on October 7th. This is according to Fox Business, as he named Booz Allen, Onduril Industries, and his company Planeteer. Karp insisted it's an issue business leaders need to solve. The outlet noted, like somehow the corporate elite of this country thinks when it's time to make money, you stand up. And when it's time to stand up, you go play golf. And like, we've got to change that. That's our fault. It's no one else's fault. Now, Fox Business said the panel met to discuss the results of the forum's sixth annual National Defense Survey, which found that most Americans want to increase military spending and provide security assistance to Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan. And you can go look this stuff up. You can go over to YouTube. You can find stuff on this forum. And this is what's going on. So you got people out there now, and thank goodness, I think what you're seeing is that there are a lot of people on the left that have supported Israel and support Jews in general, and that are Jewish. And so you're seeing what would normally seem to be a conservative or a rightist cause is now becoming a leftist one of you know what? We defend Israel and we stand with them. Israel has been our best and longest ally. And we stand with Israel. I stand with Israel. And all this crap that's going on now on college campuses, if you've not heard the rhetoric about it already, this is very similar to the way the Holocaust began. It's so paralleling that, first of all, there are Jewish teachers and students that are being locked off of campuses like Columbia. Why? Because for their safety. So that happened in the 1930s. Jews were kept out of certain areas for their safety. And you've got all these protests. Much of it, I believe, are from kids who don't know shit one about what's really going on. And they don't know anything about Israel. They don't know anything about the Middle East. They don't know anything about the extremists that would that would call for the death of Israel. I'm with Hamas, they say. Well, they don't even know Hamas is a terrorist organization. So this is what our country is going through right now. And we've had 2 decades where the public has been primed to allow this sort of thing to happen. Oh, you can't deny them their First Amendment rights. Like hell we can't. If they are inciting violence against our allies within our country, and at the same time, just last week and the week before, you heard the same group of people that have Hamas members that are inciting the crowds on these college campuses are calling death to America and death to Israel. What's that tell you? Should that be allowed? Is that free speech? Is that the kind of free speech that should be allowed in America? Should we try to incite death to our country? Does the Second Amendment, does the Constitution guarantee that? Is that what's meant by free speech? Remember, Thomas Jefferson even said, liberty too must be limited in order to be possessed. There are limitations that we have to place on our rights. And there are certain things you can't do with your free speech, especially when it incites violence or incites people to hatred that could incite violence. There's more to it than that. But that's going on, and I wanted to share that with you before we got into our book talk tonight. And now, before we get into the actual reading horror books, let's move to this thing. This is kind of fun. This is kind of like a sorbet in between dirty political news into our book talk. 14 creepy things that were found in libraries. Good segue into our talk on books. Now, libraries, of course, are a space for learning, community building, but some have been the setting of horror stories. And I've got a list here of creepy things found in libraries, horrifying discoveries ranging from unmarked graves to books made with human flesh. It's pretty crazy. So here we go. Number 1, books bound in human flesh. Oh, Randall Flagg says, my kid is a year away from college. It scares me. Yeah, my son is about 4 years away from college. So several years ago, librarians at Harvard discovered that the strange leather binding found on 3 of their books is human flesh. As it turns out, human flesh was a relatively common leather that was used for binding anatomical textbooks during the 17th century. And medical researchers harvested the flesh from cadavers after dissecting them. So books in Harvard, bound with human flesh. Do you get rid of those books, or do you keep them, put them in a museum or something? I don't know. What do you do? I would think I'd put those in a museum. I'd keep those under glass and say, these are some of the books that were here since the founding of this university. Number 2, the itinerant masturbator. Yes, you heard that right. Several years ago, 2 female students at Bradley University had separate encounters with a masturbating man in the university library. One saw him in the basement at 6:30 p.m. The other saw him in a study room at 6:45 p.m., which begs the question. Was he walking around the library masturbating for 15 plus minutes, or did he choose key locations and cease his trunk tugging while moving from one spot to the next? What's your guess on that one, folks? Or was he a ghost appearing in 2 different locations, moments apart? Number 3, an unmarked grave. When construction began for the library at Minnesota's St. Cloud State University, is Leslie in the room? Leslie's in St. Cloud. St. Cloud State University builders discovered an unmarked burial ground with both adult and child skeletons. The bones were later used as study tools in multiple courses at the university. And that's when they started construction for the library. That would be in St. Cloud, Minnesota. So probably run across old pioneer graves. Maybe they were older than that. This doesn't give me any details. It'd be interesting to find out how old those skeletons were. Number 4, ghosts. Lots of libraries are rumored to be haunted. Just remember the beginning of the original Ghostbusters movie, where there's ghosts in there. They're exploring for ghosts in a library. So lots of libraries are rumored to be haunted. Harvard's Schlesinger Library is famous for its paranormal activity, as is Memorial Library at the University of Wisconsin, where a staff member once reported that she heard the name Sally Brown creepily whispered during one of her shifts. Several ghosts have also been seen in the library, including that of novelist Helen Constance White. Interesting stuff. I'd like to go the University of Wisconsin, not far from here, half an hour away. Should go do some paranormal investigating there. Number 5, glass floors. The Library of Brooklyn's Pratt Institute has glass floors. That means anyone on the floor below you can look right up your skirt. That's where I go wear my kilt regimentally. Go, hey, how are you doing out there? Why, what do I wear beneath my kilt? Why, my socks and shoes, of course. Eh? So if that weren't creepy enough, there's also a small space between the glass tiles and bookshelves. Someone a few floors up could pee right down onto your head if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time. Number 6, bed bugs at the library. Bed bugs prefer beds, but occasionally hide in books. The University of Washington found bed bugs on books in 2012. To kill the nefarious critters, librarians placed books in freezers for 7 days, let them thaw, then froze them for 7 more days. Bed bugs make themselves at home in books, often enough for the New York Times to run an article on it. 7, human bones. During a renovation at the University of Utah's library, construction workers found human bones. The university police said the bones were probably not put there recently, and it's possible they were buried before the library was even constructed in 1936. This is just tidbits, folks. There's no real information, no details. But number 8, condoms. Multiple librarians have said they found condoms and condom wrappers either amongst the shelves or in the book drop. One of the choicest stories, we also found condoms, mostly in the book drop, including one that was tied off and full of liquid. Number 9, crack pipes and heroin. Posting on the library thing chat board, a librarian dejectedly wrote, "Bag of heroin tucked inside the dust jacket of a children's book. Sigh." Another librarian followed his comment with, "Syringe and crack pipe in the vertical files." Number 10, a dead fish. A student who worked at her school's library opened the book drop one morning to find a dead fish inside of it. The books in that box stayed smelly for quite a long time. This same person also found a VHS tape entitled Huge Bras, Volume 3, which a patron later came looking for, claiming to have put it in the Dropbox by accident. Excuse me, have you seen, by any chance, a movie called Huge Bras, Volume 3? I accidentally put it in with my books. I think I just leave it at that point. Number 11, actual teeth. According to the New York Times, baby teeth have been found in library books. One middle school library recounted finding a tooth next to a keyboard and bringing it to the nurse's office. Its owner promptly came to claim it so he could collect the tooth fairy money. 12, false teeth. One librarian found a complete set of false teeth in the dentistry section, writing, "Found a full set of false teeth once, but as they were expertly filed in the dentistry section, I prefer to see it as a situationist art prank." 13, an X-rated flip book. A middle school librarian posted the following humorous anecdote on the library thing chat board. Last night, one of the librarians in my department, children's, found that someone had taken one of the small sticky notepads off of our desk and left it on one of our tables. When she went to retrieve it, she saw that the person had drawn a picture on the top one. Then she looked closer and discovered someone had used the pad to create an entire X-rated flip book featuring a very well-endowed naked woman. The drawing indicates that it was done by a kid. Seems one of our middle schoolers is a budding animation artist. And then, of course, number 14, Bacon. Not Francis Bacon. The novelist Reynolds Price claims to have found a slice of bacon inside a book he checked out from the Duke University Library. The bacon was fried, not raw. Maybe someone was saving it for later. I don't know. So what would you do with bacon in your book? So there you go. There is our the end of our lightness and frivolity for tonight. I want to get into now, what else do you find in libraries? People reading books. I go to bookstores. I could spend my fortune at a bookstore. So I want to talk about reading horror. It's good for you, and it's even better for your kids. So there are, I just shut my thing down here. Hold on a second. I got my notes. I shut down my notes, and then I shut down the same tab that I had all my notes, or I shut down the last article, and then I shut down the tab that had all my notes on it. Here it is. So here's the big question that I'm asking. Is reading horror books, is that good for our kids? Do you let your kids read horror books? Do you read horror books to your kids? I think it's an essential. It's good for us to read horror, and it's also good for our kids, probably even better for our kids to read horror books. And one of the reasons I think that I got into making books, writing books, illustrating them, is because there are things that intrigued me when I read. And I didn't do a lot of reading when I was a kid, but I read science fiction a little bit. I read comic books mostly. That was my main source of reading. And then I went on, of course, to read, I told you, the Star Trek novels, and got into all different kinds of authors after college. And I think that I came to understand the pattern that was leading me to a more clearly defined ethos when I had my own kids. And I came to find that the comics industry, because now remember, I'll back this up a little bit. I was illustrating comics. I published some of my own comics. I was looking for a long time to try to start a comic book publishing company. I had a partner. We were looking for investment dollars. That went on for a few years, trying to get that thing off the ground. But for the most part, I came to find that the comic book industry had decided to stop making comic books for kids. And instead, they wanted to tailor even their brightly colored undies on the outside superhero books to old men nostalgic for their long past childhoods than for the children that they were intended to inspire. Sound insane? So this generation had not only stolen the medium away from its following generations, it had helped foster, I think, one of the greatest publishing faceplants in American history. It killed its own future by ignoring the basic need to grow a new crop of readers, and so made it certain that it had no future at all. And one thing no one was going near was horror stories for kids. So it was time to do what the big publishers wouldn't do: scare the hell out of kids and teach them to love it. And here's why this isn't as crazy as it sounds. Got some reasons here. Reason number one, childhood is scary. Maurice Sendak, you all know who he is? The late Maurice Sendak. He wrote Where the Wild Things Are. I remember that was a favorite book of mine. When I say I didn't read much when I was in school, I read a whole lot when I was a little kid, nothing in between, and then a whole lot after I was in college. So Maurice Sendak, who I love, he wrote Where the Wild Things Are. I remember reading that, or looking at it anyway, in kindergarten. I still have a copy of it, an old copy of it around here somewhere, an old hardback. I love him as a contributor to the lore of children's literature, as well as this dangerous and witty critic of the medium, especially when he got a little grouchier in his latter years. And once countered a happy interviewer by demanding that she understand that childhood was not a skip hop through a candy cane field of butterflies and sharing the sunshine, that it was in fact a terrifying ordeal. And he felt compelled to help kids survive. Kids live in a world of insane giants already. Nothing is the right size. The doorknobs are too high. The chairs are too big. They have little agency of their own and are barely given the power to even choose their own clothes. Though no real power can ever be given away, maybe privilege is the right term. So aside from the legitimate fears of every generation, kids today have witnessed these madhouse giants lose their jobs and their houses, grow increasingly angry and divided over politics, blow themselves up using the same planes they ride to visit grandma, and catastrophically ruin their own ecosystem, ushering in a new era of unknown tectonic change and loss that their grandkids will get to enjoy in full. So the insane giants did to the world what they did to comics. They didn't grow a future, but instead ate it for dinner. So it's a spooky time to be a kid, even without the constant barrage of school shootings, making even the once fortified classroom a potential doomsday ride. And look, the kids are already scared. So let's give them some tools to cope with it beyond telling them not to worry about it at all, when they really have every right to be scared shitless. So scary stories tell kids there's always something worse. And in effect, it comes across as more honest because they exist in a realm already familiar to them. Scary tales don't warp kids. They give them a place to blow off steam while they're being warped by everything in the world around them. Reason number 2, power to the powerless. The basic thing horror does for all of us is also its most ancient talent, the favorite system of crowd control invented by the ancient Greeks, catharsis. Who doesn't walk out of a movie that just scared the piss out of them, mercifully comforted by the mundane walk through the parking lot and the world outside? For kids, this is even more acute. If we take it further and make children both the object of terror in these stories, as well as agents for surviving monsters, well, now you're onto something magical. So plainly put, horror provides a playground in which kids can dance with their fears in a safe way that can teach them how to survive monsters and to be powerful themselves. Horror for kids lets them not only read or see these terrible beasts that are out there, but also see themselves in the story as the story's protagonists, or they see themselves in the story's protagonists. The hero's victory is the kid's victory. The beast is whomever they find beastly in their own lives. A kid finishing a scary book or a movie can walk away having met the monster and survived, ready and better armed against the next villain that's going to be coming along. Reason number 3, horror is ancient and real, and it can teach us much. In the old days, fairy tales, stories for kids were designed to teach them to avoid places of danger. Don't go where the elephant bones are, says Mufasa to Simba in The Lion King. And many other stories, countless in number, that have the same type of theme somewhere in the story. It helps them, teaches them to avoid places of danger, to avoid strangers and weird old ladies living in candy-covered houses. They were cautionary tales for generations of kids who faced death, real and tangible, almost each and every day. There was a real and preventative purpose to these stories. Stay alive and watch out for the myriad of real-world threats that haunt your every step. These stories, of course, were absolutely terrifying to kids. But these were also children that grew up in a time where of every 6 kids born, 2 or 3 would only survive to adulthood. So go and read some of the original Oz books by Baum. I've got, I think their second edition in my glass cabinet over there, a bunch of the Oz books. They're the white ones with the old illustrations in them. And those books tell me they weren't freakishly weird and threatening. The Brothers Grimm sought us to warn kids in the most horrifying way they could, so much that these types of tales have all but vanished from children's literature, because these days they're deemed too frightening and dark for kids. But they're also now more anecdotal than they were then. They mean less because the world around them grew and changed, and they remained as they had always been. They became less relevant, these tales, however fantastic and crazy they really are. Horror also touches something that's deep down inside us, down right into our flight or fight responses. We have developed as a species from an evolutionary necessity to be afraid of threats so we might flee them. And we want to survive to make more babies that can grow up to be suitably afraid of threats so they can grow up and repeat the cycle, and so on and so on and so on. So we exist today because of these smart apes, and they deserve our thanks for learning that lesson. And as a result, like almost all pop culture, horror literature can reflect in a unique way the extremely scary difficulties of being a child in a certain time. It touches on something we all feel and are familiar with, and as such can reveal a deeper understanding of ourselves as we go through the arc of being scared, and then relieved, and then scared again. The thrill is an ancient one. And when we feel it, we're connecting with something old and powerful within us. And whether it's a roller coaster, a steep water slide, or watching Harry Potter choke down a golden snitch as he falls 30 stories from his witch's broom, there's a universality in vicarious thrill-seeking and danger hunting. It's as touching as it is us touching they who began the cycle 40,000 years ago, or so, give or take a year or a decade. Now, reason number 4, horror confirms secret truths. Consider this moment from The 11th Hour, the episode that introduced Matt Smith's 11th Doctor Who to the world. You know, when grown-ups tell you everything's going to be fine and there's nothing to be worried about, but you know they're lying, says the doctor to a young, mortified Amy Pond. Uh-huh, she replies, rolling her 10-year-old eyes dramatically. The doctor leans in, a wink in his eye, and intimates, everything's going to be fine. And then they turn to face the monster living in her wall, with a screwdriver in one hand and a half-eaten apple in the other. So in doing this, writer Stephen Moffat touches brilliantly upon another essential truth of horror, that it shows us guardians and guides that are going to be more honest with us than even our own parents. Within the darkness and the shadows is our guide, who can lead us out and back into the light. But you can only find him there in the darkness when you need him most. Kids are aware of so much more that's happening in their house than we as parents even want to imagine. Something happened tonight. Talk about how kids know things. Rainey said something to me about I don't know, accidentally poking the dog in the butt, something like that. She was whining and she went to push her and poked her in the butt. And then the 12-year-old goes, "Gross. Why are you saying that to Dad? You want to poke Dad in the butt?" I said, "No, that's not what she said. Are you gay, Dad? Do you like having your butt poked?" This is the conversation that came from my 12-year-old. And Rainey and I looked at each other, so we were trying to top her to get her to stop. We were trying to shock her a little bit, and it didn't work. So kids know stuff. Kids know stuff in your house, and they know what's going on more than you even want to imagine. But because we don't share all the details of our anxious whispers, our stressful phone calls, our hushed arguments or moments, rightfully so, kids are left to fill in the facts themselves. And what one imagines tends to be far more terrible than what is actually real. They know you're fighting about something, but not what. They can tell what hastened whispers in the hall mean outside their door, or they think they do. And what they don't know for a fact, they fill in with fictions, or my daughter's case, things they learn in the hallway at school. Storytellers dabbling in horror provide them with an honest broker who doesn't shy away from the fact of werewolves or face-eating aliens. They want to put the insect babies in our stomachs. They look you straight into the eyes and whisper delightfully, "Everything's going to be just fine." And the mere fact of telling these tales proves a willingness to join in with kids in their nightmares, to bring those nightmares to life, and then subvert and vanquish the nightmares. Children love you to do this because you're sharing a secret with them, and they don't yet realize everyone else also knows that it's also fun. So the end result for me, at least, is this great sense of trust in scary books and scary comic books and scary radio shows, which you don't get that much of anymore, scary novels and movies. I never got from my parents, who tried to comfort me by telling me ghosts weren't real. Oh, ghosts aren't real. Oh, we all know they are. Horror told me that they were, but it also taught me how to face them. We deny to our kids the full measure of what we experience and suffer as adults. But they aren't idiots, and they know something's going on. And what we're really doing by accident is robbing them of the trust that they can survive, and that we understand this and can help them do so as well. And so where we as adults can't tell them a half-truth, horror can tell them the whole truth, and there's a great mercy in that. Reason number 5, sharing scary stories brings people together. How many times have I seen a group of kids discover, to their excessive delight, that they have all read and loved the same Goosebumps book? My kids devoured those books. The first thing they do is compare and rank the scariest parts. They laugh at how they jumped out of their bed when the cat came for a pat on the head, or stayed up all night staring at the half-open closet. It's like vets having shared a battle. They're brought together in something far more essential and primordial than a mere soccer game or a surprise math test. And looking back myself, I can't recall having more fun in a movie theater at home with illicit late-night cable TV than I was watching a scary movie with my friends. Dark Shadows, I just mentioned to somebody today. Or they mentioned to me and I mentioned it back. I used to scare the shit out of myself watching that movie, that series when I was a little kid. 2nd and 3rd and 4th and 5th grade. The shared experience, the screams, the adrenaline, induced laughter that always follow are some of the best and least fought times in childhood. And going through it together means we're not alone. Not really. And reason number 6, hidden inside horror are the facts of life. Growing up is scary and painful and violent, and your body's doing weird things, and you might, to your great horror, become something beastly and terrible on the other side. The Wolfman taught us this. Being weird can only be lonely, and your parents never understand you, and the world is sometimes incomprehensible. Frankenstein taught us that. Sex and desire is creepy and intimate in dangerous and potentially threatening ways. So said Dracula. So whether it's the Hunger Games, as a clear-cut metaphor for the Darwinian hellscape of high school, or learning to turn and face a scary part of ourselves, or the dangers of the past via any of the zillions of ghost stories around, horror can serve as a thinly veiled reflection of ourselves in a way almost impossible to imagine in other forms. Horror can do this because, like sci-fi and fantasy, it has inherent within it a cloak of genre tropes that beg to be stripped off. Its treasures are never buried so deep that you can't find them with some mild digging, and it's a gift to us made better by having to root around for it. And like all deep knowledge, we have to earn its boons rather than receive them guppy-mouthed like babies in a bottle. Fear is not the best thing in the world, of course, but it's not going anywhere, and we're likely forced to meet it in some capacity, great or small, each and every day. There's no way around it. I must fear. Fear is the mind killer. I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me, and when it is gone past, I will turn to see its path. Where the fear is gone, there will be nothing, and only I will remain. And folks, it's all we have time for. With the radio audience, we'll hit a little bit more of this over in the chat room. Come on over to youtube.com/Scotty Roberts if you're not there already, and hear a little bit of the end of this, and we'll go on from there. So everybody over on radio, we'll see you over here. Thanks for being here. Live long and prosper.
Join us every weeknight at 9 p.m. Central Standard Time, 10 p.m. Eastern. The Intrepid Radio Program, a Scotty Roberts Productions broadcast.
Hey folks, this is Scotty Roberts, and this is the Intrepid Radio broadcast. I've been broadcasting for about 20 years now, covering such topics as science, politics, the paranormal, weird science, weird world history, archaeology, and the paranormal. Everything from ghosts to cryptids to creepy things that go bump in the night. So every week I bring you 3 new episodes. Come and join my channel and also be a patron to this site. So see the details below, and we'll see you here. Dave, I love you, brother.
I miss you too.
I miss you too, I heard.
Yep,
Did you guys hear that?
I heard that.
I miss you, Dave. Hey, welcome to the Captain's Cabin, everybody. Thanks for sticking around. I appreciate having you here tonight. Barbie D, sorry to see you go. Thanks for being here for the night, though. And thank you to everybody who's been listening tonight. And Captain's Cabin, that's what this is, the after show. Swab me decks and climb the mizzen mast. And don't do anything I wouldn't do in the forecastle. Get off the poop deck. So, welcome. Good to have you here. And we've been talking tonight. We're talking about reading and why it's good, why horror is good for kids. And we all know that it's a good thing, but maybe we've never defined it in those terms before. And so we were just getting to the place where we're almost wrapping that up. And we were talking about fear is one of those things that kids have. It's hidden inside of horror are the hidden facts of life. This was reason number 6. And growing up is scary, it's painful, it's violent. Your body's doing weird things. And you might, to your great horror, become something beastly and terrible on the other side. We talked about the Wolfman, taught us that. Frankenstein taught us what it's like to be lonely and your parents never understand you and the world is incomprehensible. And Dracula shows us that sex is creepy and intimate in dangerous and potentially threatening ways. So whether it's the Hunger Games, which is a metaphor of high school, horror can do this, like sci-fi and fantasy. There's a cloak of genre tropes that beg to be stripped off. We have to earn the boons that come from it. And fear is the best thing in the world. Not the best thing, of course, but it's not going anywhere, and we're likely forced to meet it someday along the way, sometimes every day. And the more we ignore scary things, the bigger and scarier those things become. And one of the great truths from Herbert's perpetually important Dune series is the Bene Gesserit's litany against fear. And that's what I was reading as we were exiting. The Bene Gesserit's litany against fear. I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me. And when it is past and gone, I will turn to see its path. And where the fear is gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain. And so in so many geeky ways, this sums up the most important and primary element of fear. Not to pretend that it doesn't exist, or whether it should or should not, but to meet it, to hug it, to let it go so we may be better prepared for whatever else comes next. Crafting horror narratives for kids does require changing the way scary things are approached. But I'd argue that what tools what tools were required to take off the table for a younger audience aren't really important tools in telling those stories in the first place. Rape, gore, blood splatter, themes like that are horrible. Not just horror, they're horrible, they're terrible. Deeply lazy, often poorly executed shortcuts for delivering weight and fear in a story. You want to watch a good movie? A slasher movie isn't a good horror movie to me. A psychological thriller is, because it makes me think. Don't need the bloodshed as much as you need the thinking. We're forced to think more creatively when we're denied the alluring tropes of the genre to lean on. The sorts of things one must do to make scary stories for kids to make these tales more interesting and qualitative anyway. We're more apt to reinvent the genre when we aren't burdened by the rules all the genres allure us into adopting. With kids, one has to land on safer ground sooner than would be the case with adults. But otherwise, what would I do as a writer? When I tell a scary story to kids, it's essentially the same thing I would do to craft one for adults. Just have to watch how soon I land the kids in the resolutions. There are certain themes that require life experience to understand as a reader. And a successful storyteller should know their audience. I did that. I haven't really written any horror novels. In writing passively on the back burner, the 10 Breaths of Raw, I'm dealing more with horror than I have before, but it's for young adults, perhaps middle grade out there, not for little kids. I don't ever really write for little kids. When I wrote Tam O'Hare, I wrote some scary things in Tam O'Hare. And I wrote things that Tam had to overcome. But I brought the reader through those things rather quickly. And don't be afraid to scare your kids or your kids' friends with scary books or stories that you love. Obviously, you have to tailor things to your kids' individual levels. For example, films and books that I let my 14-year-old digest, I won't let my younger boy get into until he's maybe 16. They're just different people and can handle different levels of material. They both love spooky stuff, but within their individual limits. My kids like to be scared. They all like ghost stuff. But there's only certain times they'll watch it and certain times they don't want to have anything to do with it at all. So showing The Shining to an 8-year-old is generally a pretty poor idea. So my advice is when there's a doubt, leave it out. That's like, do you know what one of the greatest horror movies would be? And my daughter is scared to death of, I suggested, because she asked questions about it, Schindler's List. What a horrific movie. Not written as horror, but written to terrify us of what happened. My daughter's not ready for that. I'm a bit nostalgic about sneaking in to see things like The Exorcist, Alien, the original Alien scared the crap out of me. And I was 17 years old when I saw it. Being scared, being terrorized are not the same thing. Know the difference. We don't cross the streams or it will totally backfire on you. But if you navigate it right, it can be a completely positive and powerful experience. I say get out and scare your kids today. Do it right, and they're going to thank you when they're older. There's going to be a lot of adults who find this whole post offensive and terrible. They're not going to like it. This radio show is something that they would not advise anybody to listen to because they think horror is not, kids are not the place for horror. The parents that find this so inappropriate are under the illusion that if they don't ever let their kids know any of this scary stuff, they won't ever have bad dreams or be afraid. And not knowing that, tragically, they're just making them more vulnerable to fear when it comes. Let the kids follow their interests, but be a good guardian rather than an oppressive guard. Only adults are under the delusion that childhood is a fairy rainbow fantasy land. Just let your kids lead on whatever they love, and you're going to be fine. Just be the guardian that helps them along. Neat stuff, I think. So, what are your thoughts on all this, guys? What do you think about horror for kids? Scaring kids, letting kids be scared. What does that do for them? Other than the things I just talked about, is perhaps allowing our kids to be exposed to horror and the horrific is fear with a safety net. Children should read scary books. There was a guy who writes kids' books, Caven Scott, has been scaring kids for ages. And he said, he wrote this little thing that said, "It's not right," quote unquote. "The words made me look up from my table when I was signing books after a library visit. A mum was standing in front of me, arms crossed, brow furrowed, and lips pursed. I think it's irresponsible, that's all." I had just led a workshop about spooky stories and malignant monsters to an excitable gang of middle grade readers. I'd read a spooky passage from a story and create a brand new horror with the group. The lady in question had come in at the end of the session, hadn't liked what she'd heard. It turned out that she was worried that her son would have nightmares, scared by our talk of vampires, werewolves, and zombies. I understood her concern, he says. I have 2 daughters, and when they were younger, I used to keep an eye on what they were watching and reading, and yet here I am, a writer who has made a career writing stories to scare kids through universes such as Doctor Who and Star Wars. He said, a lot of my stories feature monsters. My latest series, Warhammer Adventures, Warped Galaxies, is no exception. It takes place in the universe created for the popular tabletop game Warhammer 40,000, which is, by its very nature, a dangerous place. It's full of terrifying aliens, fabulous beasts, ferocious monsters. The series sees a bunch of kids growing up against such horrors and times. It gets a little scary, with our heroes facing peril on numerous worlds. Look at Samwise Gamgees and Frodo Baggins in Lord of the Rings. 100-year-old story. From when it was written. But is it irresponsible to scare young readers? Well, yes, if that's all you're trying to do. But I truly believe that injecting a little fear into adventure books is important for a number of reasons. We live in a scary world. First of all, it's fun. That's one of the reasons that horror stories exist in the first place. We like to be scared. We like to scare people. And as long as the fear has a safety net, and the safety net with a book is that you're hopefully reading it in safety, a scary story is the literary version of a roller coaster. You strap yourself in, you're sent on a thrilling ride that quickens your pulse. Your stomach lurches, your fingers tingle. Then when it's over, 9 times out of 10, you laugh. After vomiting. You've just pushed yourself to the edge of your comfort zone, all without being in actual danger. And the same really goes for scary books. We live in a scary world, especially for kids. There's so much they don't understand. It's full of emotions and that confound most adults, frankly. Kids experience fear and anger. They can be frustrated or nervous or jealous. And they're let down and have to cope with rejection and disappointment and all the bullshit that goes along with that. So scary stories help kids learn how to deal with the real world. They're a way to acknowledge that life isn't always easy, and it helps them learn that it's okay to be scared. Monsters are fun, but they should also help us understand scary situations and how to cope with them. I hope that no one reading any of these books ever has to live through their home planet being blown up or their town being burnt to a crisp by a dragon or zombies eating their parents. I hope you don't have to experience those things. However, I'd like to think that kids reading these kinds of books will understand a little bit more about the importance of working together to find solutions for seemingly insurmountable problems, how to dig deep to find the courage that they need to get through something that usually makes their palms go clammy. Scary books give us a chance to examine what we're afraid of, to talk about it, and to shine light on negative emotions rather than just bury them deep inside. And kids are the best censors for this stuff. That's not to say that writers can be irresponsible. As with all fiction, there are rules you need to follow, especially when writing for younger readers. You have to be sensitive, not to push things too far. Excessive blood and gore, as we spoke about earlier, is a big no-no. You don't want to do that. You don't need to remember that. You need to remember that kids are largely like happy endings, heroes prospering while the baddies get their comeuppance. But that doesn't mean that everything has to be wrapped up with a neat bow. You only have to look at stories by Ronald Dahl, Neil Gaiman, J.K. Rowling, Rick Riordan, to see that kids' stories can be dark and that children are capable of understanding more than we sometimes give them credit for. They're also the best censors. If a kid finds a book too scary, they're likely to close it and pick up something else, coming back to the offending tale when they're ready. And what a great opportunity to discuss what scares them and how to judge situations that they're going to face later on in life. Learning about dangers. Back in the library, this author listened to the lady's concerns and he talked to her about the book she enjoyed as a child. Did she read anything scary? No, she said quickly before changing her mind. She then told him how much she had loved The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, but how the White Witch had given her nightmares. The funny thing was that as she described the bad dreams, she smiled and then explained how she'd learned about the dangers of going with strangers from Edmund's experiences with the witch. Her son had never read the Narnia books and asked if they had any monsters in them, to which she said yes. He asked if he could read them. She left the library smiling, chatting with her boy about dangerous dragons, terrifying wolves, and fearsome goblins. And that's where you hope that parents will read more stuff like that together with their kids. So that's the kind of stuff I like to write about a little bit in some of my stories. Things that are quickly resolved for kids, involved enough for adults. Do you know The Sword and the Clay? Wasn't necessarily written for children. It's written so kids could understand it, young adults, mid-grade to young adult, and parents to enjoy. And there is some bloodshed in that book. And there was a scene that I toned down because I talked about the Roman centurion in that hacking off the head of a guy that he pursued. And I thought, and Ryan Gale was working as my historical consultant on that and as a publishing editor. And he said, you might want to lighten the tone of that one just a little bit. Well, actually, I think it was when he took down the horse by cutting out its legs beneath it or something like that. And he said, you should tone that down. if kids are going to be reading this. And so I did, because you're caught up in the story, and you don't always think, oh, this is going to be something might be rough for kids. So I toned it down. There are things to be afraid of in the book, the bad guys. And even some of the good guys end up getting killed in the book. There's Tam O'Hare. Through the whole book, he's looking for his little cousin, little girl who's been stolen by the fairy folk. And what he finds out, not to give the story away to you, spoiler alert if you haven't read it yet and you want to, cover your ears. But Tam is looking for, he's on this adventure to try to find her through the entire book, and learns that near the very end that he's unable to bring her back. And she's not in danger there, but she's lost forever to the enchanted world. I'm going to read that to you. All right, Tam O'Hare. This is giving away some of the story. What am I caught on down there? Oh, a cord. And this is how this transpires. I know there's only a few of you left here. Some of you didn't come at all. But let's take a look at this. I want you to hear this. Through this whole book, they've been looking for this little girl. Tam and his young squire, the squirrel, Horatio McNutt. And they're on their way. They went to Aberfeldy, a town in Scotland. And Aberfeldy was a 2.5 day walk from Edinburgh. Tam and McNutt rode a ferry across the Firth of Forth and walked straight north to the town of Perth, where they spent the night at an inn. The next morning they walked until they found the River Tay and followed it to Aberfeldy. The countryside was beautiful, and its freshness was a welcome change from the deck of a ship, politics, and battle. Tam finally could focus all his energy on finding wee Brindolin. That's the little girl. After stopping at a public house for some food, the pair continued a few miles along the River Tay until it spilled into the long, narrow loch bearing the same name. They crossed the river and headed along the south shore. "You had said that you don't understand the good people, Uncle," considered McNutt. "What is it that's so mysterious about them?" Tam thought for a moment. "They're creatures of the Almighty's that don't seem to fit into this world, at least not in the way that we think they should." I skipped a couple of pages by accident. Hold on. "They're here yet apart." Tam stopped and looked out over the waters of the loch. He stooped down and scooped up a palmful of dirt, then spread his fingers, letting it sift through and drop slowly back to the ground. "We want everything to be as solid as the ground on which we walk. We want to be able to touch it, see it, feel it. Then and only then will we believe in it." "Rather how we tend to treat the Almighty himself, eh?" postulated McNutt, in more of a statement than a direct question. "Aye," Tam smiled. "Rather like that. We always want proof, yet for the things that are truly important, there rarely ever is." Tam let the last of the dirt spill out of his hand and then brushed his palms together, dusting them clean. McNutt pondered for a moment, then continued, "Do you fear the good people?" "I fear what I don't understand," answered Tam. "Then to understand something," paused McNutt, "eliminates fear?" "No, not always," replied Tam, "but it does pull away the shroud of confusion. I was always taught that God is not the author of confusion, but of a sound mind. And with the absence of confusion, clarity finds its path, and with clarity comes boldness, and with then the washing away of fear. They walked on in silence for a while. The waters of the loch lapped gently on the shore, and distant birds echoed in the greenwood around them. The place seemed to hum softly, and Tam was certain he could hear the faint lull of the pipes on the breeze. McNutt thought he heard it too, but when they'd stopped to listen, there was nothing. Chills ran up the back of Tam's neck, but it wasn't from fear, for he felt only peace in his heart. His eyes began to water. McNutt had tears as well, but they said nothing. They walked on for a short distance when a very strange, quite unexplainable thing happened. No longer were they just two walking down the path, but three. There was no sudden, startling fear, no wretched awareness of the mystical, only peace. Without any explanation or introduction, without sound or rush of wind, without fanfare or incantation, there they were walking along the shore with the old badger of Loch Tay. The old mystic's face seemed to shine, not with a light of some form, but with a peacefulness that filled the woods around them. Then there it was again, the sound of pipes on the breeze. And this time Tam could hear them clearly. They were soft and lilting, wafting with the undulation of the gentle gusting of the wind. They were both sad and sweet all at once. "Your little Brindlin has indeed been charmed away by the good people," said the gentle, brittle voice of the old badger, who walked between Tam and McNutt with his arms around them both. Skip to page again. "What must I do to find her and bring her home?" asked Tam, unsure of why the tears were beginning to stream down his face. "You may not be able to," said the old one, "and if you try, you may not be able to return yourself." Tam thought on this for a moment, then asked again, pausing on each word, "What must I do?" The old badger stopped and turned away from Tam. He looked deeply into McNutt's eyes, then took the young squirrel's hand in his, holding it gently yet very firmly. He turned back around to Tam, never loosening his grip on McNutt's hand. "Look into the forest," he said to Tam. "Do you see that standing stone?" Tam looked away from the shore toward the edge of the woods, and sure if there wasn't a thick, stout, standing stone, worn and cracked with the fissures of time, covered in vines and all overgrown with moss, as he approached it, he noticed that it was only slightly taller than himself, with a large, smooth hole in the center, about the size of a small wagon wheel. The exposed portions of the stone surface revealed that it was dark bluish black in color and was cool to the touch. McNutt started to walk toward Tam, curious about the standing stone, but the badger held his hand in firm but gentle resistance. McNutt didn't know why, but he understood and remained where he was. This, by the way, is the painting of the old badger and Tam and McNutt walking along Loch Tay. All that is around you is not, and all that is around you is, said the old badger to Tam. Brindlin is here with you, yet she is not. Forgive me, but you speak in riddles, said Tam softly, and I do not understand. Do not understand, replied the old one. Believe. What must I do? Pleaded Tam. Thrice through the heart, and the world will depart, chanted the old badger. Pass yourself through the stone center 3 times, and all the while your thoughts only on your wee Brindolin. 3 times, Tam repeated under his breath, as he slowly turned away and stepped closer to the stone. He threw a quick glance back over his shoulder at Horatio and at the old badger before pushing away the vines obscuring the hole through the stone center. Then he stooped down and stepped through the opening to the other side of the stone. He walked back around to the front of the stone and stepped through again, all the while thinking of Brindolin and how frightened she must be. When he emerged on the other side, he turned and came round to the front once again, glancing at the 2 standing on the shore. He hesitated for a brief moment. The sound of the loch and the greenwood blended into the ethereal sound of the pipes that had now grown even more distinct, filling the air around him. Tam stepped up and through the stone's hewn-out center for the 3rd and final time. When he passed to the other side, the woods were suddenly filled with a light, low, nearly transparent mist that floated just below Tam's knees. He turned back around to the front of the stone. His squire and the old badger were gone. The sun was glinting off the loch, tinting everything a golden hue. The trees were lush with bright colors of autumn. The sad, sweet pipes were now no longer merely a distant sound echoing over the waters of the loch, but they melted into the hum of the very essence of the world around him. Tam wasn't sure if they were really even there, or if the wind was playing tricks on his ears. But he felt as if he could touch the very music with the tips of his fingers and taste the notes on his tongue. He closed his eyes, turned his face skyward, and breathed in deep, filling his lungs, it seemed as if for the first time. "Welcome, Tam! Welcome, Tam O'Hare! Welcome, welcome!" came several small voices from behind him. He turned and saw a group of tiny people who looked like young children, yet smaller. The tallest of them came no higher than Tam's waist, and they all gathered around him with genuine smiles. The wee folk took Tam by the hands, led him along a path through the woods, away from the loch. All the while they asked him joyously if he would join them in feasting and dancing. "I would love nothing better," Tam said, with happiness flooding his heart. Up ahead, Tam could see a clearing in the wood, with an enormous fire burning in its center. Hundreds of the good people were dancing in a ring around the fire, singing along with the tune the pipes were echoing in the wood. As Tam entered the clearing, the wee folk who had greeted him broke off and ran in all directions, some to the dance and others to sprawling, ornately carved oaken tables filled with every sort of delicious food and drink imaginable. Several of the dancers came to Tam and pulled him into the ring, where he joined hands and kicked up his feet, singing along with the rest of them, and he danced and danced and danced for what seemed like hours. Yet he never grew tired or weary. He went to the tables and ate and drank, singing songs, not caring how he knew the words. Then he danced some more, and he was filled with happiness. Beyond happiness, really. For the first time in his life, he was filled with joy. The sky glowed with golden hues, and pink billowy clouds floated over the treetops. With a handful of grapes and a goblet of sweet wine, Tam walked down the path to the shore of the loch and sat on the hillside. There were wee folk lazing all around him, and the peaceful, sweet pipes wafted on the gentle breeze. Tam had never been happier or more filled with peace at any time in his life. He drank deeply from his goblet, draining it. Then, after setting it down in the grass beside him, he lay his head back and looked into the clouds, where he watched a white bird floating gracefully on the breeze. He blinked twice, sat up and looked toward the lock, elbow on his bent knee. Then he saw her. Sitting on the ground before the old standing stone was little Brindolin. She had several of the wee folk around her, and she was playing a wooden flute for them as they sat quietly listening. Tam stood to his feet and moved toward the girl, drawn by the lulling peacefulness of the flute. The music was beautiful. "Ah, me," Tam said with a soft smile. "If only your grandfather could hear you play such beautiful music." And in that instant, his wits came rushing back to him. The beauty and peace of this place had charmed him, and until this very moment he had lost all sense of why he had come. He stepped closer to Brindolin and knelt down beside her. Reaching up, he gently took the flute from her hands, and she smiled at him. There is that illustration in the book. She looked around, a bit confused. "I'm sorry. Why, hello, Cousin Tam," she said in a crisp little voice that sparkled like the sun on living water. "Hello, my sweet," said Tam, tears flooding his eyes. "I've come to bring you home." She looked around a bit confused, then back at Tam. "But I am home, cousin," she said cheerily. Tam took her by the hands and said gently, "No, my little bird, I mean home, to your family at Glenborough." Brindolin furrowed her brow a bit, then a smile slowly filled her little face. "Oh, Grandfar Whitebeard," she exclaimed. "I remember him, and Sister Abigail and Mother." The little girl's entire essence seemed to smile at Tam, who could only but smile back with all his heart. Then suddenly, and with some sense of urgency, she pulled her hands out of Tam's and stood to her feet. Turning to a nearby bush of yellow roses, she reached in, avoiding the thorns, and plucked a single blossom. She turned back to Tam and tenderly took his hand in hers, upturning his palm, and in his hand she placed the delicate yellow rose. "Give this to my sister, for I ken that you love her," the wee girl said brightly, "and tell all my family that I love them too, with all my heart." Tam looked at the rose in his hand, and a strange thing started to happen. He could see through his hand to the ground below. Then, looking at Brindolin, he could see the hazy lock through her as she began to dissolve before his very eyes. All around him, the wee folk were sweetly saying, "Goodbye, Tam O'Hare. Goodbye. Do come again, Tam O'Hare, when you can stay and dance with us some more." Tam looked at Brindolin, who was almost a mist. "No, don't go. Come with me, lass," he cried. "I canna, cousin. I belong here," she replied. "The wee rose will live as long as you ne'er let it touch the ground, cousin." Her voice echoed off till it was as thin as the evening mist. "Be happy, Cousin Tam. Be happy. Be happy." Then she was gone. Tam sat all alone on the shore of Loch Tay. The air was cool and crisp and blue, and the sun was rising over the eastern hills. He wondered if he had been dreaming, but there was the yellow rose in the palm of his hand. He was still on his knees in front of the old standing stone. He looked, but McNutt and the old badger were not waiting where he had left them. They must have taken shelter for the night. Had it been all night? In his heart, he felt that he had broken his word to Uncle Argyle, and it was going to break Abigail's heart. He had failed, and little Brindolin was still under the enchantments of the good people. She was gone from them, and there was nothing Tam nor anyone could do. He sat on the ground, with his back against the standing stone, and with his face in his hands, he wept. And high on the air the pipes lilted softly, and never was piping so sad, and never was piping so sweet. End of chapter. And I mentioned this the other night when I wrote that chapter. It was all at once. It just poured out of me. And that was 1998, 1999 when I wrote that, 25 years ago. And when I was done writing that, I hit period, and never was piping so sweet, period. And I had tears just streaming down my face. And that's when I asked myself, what the hell did I just write that it has that effect on me? And so that's where I say a lot of me is in Tam O'Hare. And by the way, if you look at the cover, tucked in his hat is the yellow rose. So how do we write for kids? We write to draw them in. We write to frighten them. We write to scare them, to teach them lessons, to teach them how to overcome. And in the next chapter, he's reunited with McNutt and his family and Uncle Argyle and the old badger he never sees again. But he finds out that one night he's been gone. I should let you learn this, but I got to tell you. He gets told that he was gone for 9 months. And they thought him dead. So, there you go. I thought, what better way to end this episode talking about writing for kids, scaring kids. Horror is good for them. This Tam O'Hare is not a story of horror, but it's a story that's filled with different things that happen that kids can start to cope with. I used to tell these tales to my daughters when they were young. My twins who are 32 now. When they were 7, I started telling them these stories. And then I wrote the book. This was the picture. We sat down drawing in marker all these characters one day, and I did this painting of Tam and McNutt. Way back in 1998, I did that painting for my children. And it's large. And I was going to frame it and hang it, and it's lost. It got lost along the way. The original, thank goodness I have scans of it. I think I know where it is, but it's probably gone forever. But that's a long story in and of itself. Not worth telling. But, and then I wrote the story. So there it is. So I hope you enjoyed that. Joseph says here in the chat room, he says, my wife just said to me tonight that I need to get some horror books. And I said, nah. I used to love horror movies and the culture, but have fallen out of interest the last decade. Then this stream. You know, things don't happen on accident, Joseph. Might be a good time to get some good horror books, scary books that your kids can read, or that you can read to your kids. And teach them how to be scared and how to overcome and survive and cope and move on and be happy and joyful. That's what it's all about. So, thanks for being here, Joseph, by the way. I appreciate that. So, everyone, that's it until Friday. We'll be back on Friday with another episode of this show. Tonight, we're rather sparsely populated tonight here in the captain's cabin. Captain's cabin is the after show. If those of you who may have come late or come for the first time into this segment of the show, we do our first hour on radio, and then we lapse over, and there's usually more conversation. All my regular callers are not here calling in, so here at 10:47, about 13 minutes earlier, since I read some from the book and we didn't have any callers call in tonight, or our regulars, we're going to call it a night. But Friday night, be here in the captain's cabin. We may have Professor Bauer and also Jason back. And I think we may have a repeat of Whose Bottle is Bigger? And that'll be after the radio show, when we're off the radio waves. And we're back just solely here in the YouTube channel. We might do a wee bit of drinking along with whatever we're talking about. Oh, there's JP right there. We shall see. We shall see. JP is in the middle of moving. So if he can break away for that would be great. Joseph says, thank you, Scotty. She said that, and 10 minutes later, you went live. I'll listen to both of you. LOL. Have a great night. Joseph, thank you. You have a good night yourself and have fun with that. Report back in. Let me know what you pick up for your kid. And something, I'll share this one last thing with you. The first story I ever read to my children was when my twins, who are now, I mentioned, now 32 years old, my twin daughters, when they were in vitro. They had not yet been born. And I found, as my wife was in her third trimester, that when I talked next to her, somebody said, your kids can hear you talk. They can recognize your voice. Keep in mind, all they've got separating you is a little bit of skin and muscle. And of course, amniotic fluid, I suppose. But so I would talk to them and I would get wild reactions. They would move. You'd see their feet, against the skin of my wife's stomach, moving. They'd roll around when I'd start talking. And so the first book I ever read to them, they weren't even born yet. I picked up Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island. And I read it with all the voices, the pirate voices. I read it with me pirate voices. Mind the black spotter, and did all of that in different accents, and we had a good time. And every time I would read that book to them, they became ecstatic movement in my wife's womb. Now, I did quiz them when they were born and said, do you remember what happened in chapter 8? No response. But they always loved the sound of my voice. They always loved me reading to them. I read to them all the time. And they became voracious readers themselves. And they're both creatives. You all know what they do for a living. They make mermaid tales. And they've been doing this. They're in their 13th or 14th year now. They're fantastic at it. Very successful. But it's never too soon to start reading to your kids. Dads, they'll hear your voice. And as they start to understand language, start reading them things that might scare them a little bit. Did the caterpillar make it to the end of the leaf? We don't know. Inchworm, measuring the marigolds, so on and so forth. So we teach them from a very young age. To the bookstore, Joseph. I don't know where you live. If you're in the Minneapolis, St. Paul area, you can go to Half Price Books. That's a treat for our kids. Rainey and I, now my twins and my son, as most of you know, from my first marriage, they're older. Rainey and I have 3 kids, 14, 12, and 9. One of the biggest treats for them for the last few years has been going into the city. We have to run in and do some errands. I go to the art store. Rainey goes to the craft store or pick something. We always go to Half Price Books, and we go to lunch, Chick-fil-A or something. The kids like. And so they don't have any of the politics wrapped up in why they should or shouldn't like Chick-fil-A. They just like going there. So that's what we do. So a treat for them is going to the bookstore. And I like reading them. And I've gotten lots of amazing books at Half Price Books. So it's a good place to go. Checking in from Michigan, says Joseph. All right. We're in Michigan, by the way. I'm just curious. I lived in Detroit for a couple of years back in 89 through 91. Through 92. I lived in Detroit, kind of north. I think it's west of the cities. North and west. I lived way out in Livonia, Novi area. Kind of halfway to Lansing, I think, almost. We were still considered the outskirts of Detroit out there. And I worked for, you grew up in Hazel Park. All right. I was the creative director at Guardian Photo, which is now defunct. This is back before digital, 89, 90, 91. And Guardian Photo, owned by the same guy. I can't think of his name off the top of my head now. He was old back then. He owned the Palace at Auburn Hills, and he owned the Detroit Pistons. And so the CEO of the company would always come into my office at least once a week. And he'd say, "Hey, kid," he says, "you want tickets tonight?" Do I? And so most of the time he couldn't make any of the games, the Pistons games. And so he gave me his tickets. And he'd give me 4 to 6 tickets, whatever I wanted. And it was center court, second aisle off the court. And I'd bring my buddies and we'd all go to the Pistons games. At least it seemed like it was once a week that happened. So yeah, small world, round or flat. I'm a rounder. Yeah, I saw some meme that showed the flat Earth orbiting the sun like a flat piece of paper, and all the other planets, the other 9 planets in the solar system, were all globes. And said, "Wow, this is awkward." All right, guys, that's it. Joseph, good to meet you tonight. Glad you're here. Have a good time. Report back in. Tell me what kind of books you found. And let me ask you one last question. Depending on how old your kids are, I've got a good book suggestion. Great book suggestion. I read it on this show once because I had talked about it. I read this to my kids when they were small. It's a picture book. I don't know where it is. I'd just grab it if it was sitting right here. But it's called The Ghost of Nicholas Grebe. Greebe. And it's a picture book, and it's really well written. And it's written, it's not a see Jane run type of picture book. It's a picture book that has a story. And it's an old man on the first page dies at the stroke of midnight. Takes place colonial America. And wonderful illustrations. Oh, that's good to know, Joseph. He's been here a long time. Rarely chats, though. I'm glad you chose tonight to chat. I'm glad you chose tonight to be here. But in The Ghost of Nicholas Grebe, the old man dies. And time passes. Well, they bury him. It's the middle of the winter, so it's a shallow grave. The dog goes out at midnight and digs up his leg bone and hauls it off. And from that point on, the ghost of Nicholas Grebe haunts the old farmhouse. And it takes it through a couple of different centuries of haunting. And it's, I always used to read it this way to my kids because Nicholas Grebe his ghost would appear, and it's done in a very cartoony way. Not cartoons, it's wonderful, amazing illustrations, but 5, 9, and 12, perfect ages. And he said, The woman was cooking and she heard him, and he said, it was first his wife, his widow. Forevermore I quest till all my bones together rest. And this is what he says at various times throughout time. And it's the amazing journey that this bone takes and eventually ends up back at the farmhouse a couple of centuries later. Or a century later, at least. So it's a fun little book. It's one of those, like 30-page books that's, got a paragraph on each page and easy reading, and your kids are going to love it. I read that to my kids. And that was one of the books when my twin daughters moved out. I only say repeat twin daughters because they were dividing stuff and, what to take with them and because for a brief time they lived apart. Well, they live apart now, but they have a business together. So they see each other every day. But when they first moved out, they would fight over, not nasty fighting, but they kind of struggled over who would get the ghost of Nicholas Grebe, who would get Wendigo's Revenge, or The Return of the Wendigo, it's called. Another beautiful picture book for kids, Native American. Beautiful, beautiful artwork. And a great story. And so they would fight over who got what book. And so somebody got it. And so I had to rebuy it. So I have one on my shelf for my newer kids. Very close in age to yours. 9, 12, and 14. So anyway, there we go. Good stuff. Have fun with it, Joseph. Everybody else, thank you for being here. We're going to get out of here now. It's 2 minutes, 1 minute until the time we normally sign off. So how about that? Oh, the title of the story is it's called, here, I'll type it in the chat room, The Ghost of Nicholas Grebe. And then you have the Wendigo's Return. It might be just Wendigo's Return or The Wendigo's Return. And my book that I was just reading from, if you want to know, you can go to tamohare.com. There's the link for that. You can go take a look at it if you want. And then there's also, of course, The Sword in the Clay.com. And it was actually my daughter's now 9. When she was 8, she would plead with me every night to read The Sword in the Clay to her. And that's a little deeper. It's a little longer. It's a bigger hardback book. It's about 8,000 words. It's a story about a brother during World War I. A true story, by the way, of a man who fought for the 42nd Battalion, which later became the Black Watch after World War I. They were inducted into the Black Watch. And it's his story of finding a sword, an old sword in the clay after the bombing of Amiens, France during World War I. And finding out the sword dates back to Caesar's Gallic Wars in the late 40s, early 50s BCE. And 2,000 years ago. And so while I've got the story of the sword and the man, and by the way, in his own book called Ghosts Have Warm Hands, his memoirs of World War I, I've got it on my shelf here somewhere. He talked about how the ghost of his brother visited him, saved his life at Vimy Ridge in World War I. Moving story. And so we have all that. That's the true story, or his story at least. And so we have this sword. And so I had to create a cast of characters 2,000 years ago. The centurion who would have owned this sword. Fictionalized, but I wrote of brothers who went to war for Caesar's Gallic Wars, and fought at the Battle of Samara Briva, which was right there at Amiens, France, which is Samara Briva is now Amiens, France. And it basically, back then, it meant the place at the river where there was a bridge, something like that. And it's the story of the battle there and how his sword ended up being in the ground. Tara, nice to see you. Thank you. Thanks for coming in. Thanks for being here. Good to see you. So there you go. That's what that stuff's about. You can go read about them at those links and go pick up those books. Report back in. All right, guys, let's get out of here. I'm belaboring the ending of the show. It's the long goodbye. It's now 11:02, so let's get our butts out of here. I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you for being part of the show. Thanks for being part of my life. We will talk again on Friday when we are back with our next show. Come prepared. We'll have a good time. Live long and prosper.